Today, we're going to talk about the planned expansion of Disney's Pop Century Resort. So Disney's Pop Century Resort opened as a value resort themed around the decades of the late 1900s. Did you know that Disney had planned an expansion of Pop Century? It was actually going to be called the Classic Years and it was going to be built across the lake from the original Pop Century. This is actually a very serious project that had actually began construction. So if you're ever walking around the Art of Animation Resort, and you happen to notice that the buildings in the Little Mermaid section look a little strange compared to the Lion King and the Cars section, that's for a reason. We'll get to it here in a second, but take a notice that at the Little Mermaid room, all the hallways are outside. It's like a motel, and all the rooms are just your standard regular Disney value rooms. They're not the family suites that you have at the Lion King section or at the Cars section. Hey, Future Steven here. So while I was editing this video, I realized I completely left out an entire section of this resort. We're going to be talking about the Art of Animation Resort here in a minute, and I kept referring to the Little Mermaid section, the Lion King section, and the Cars section. There's like the biggest section of the resort I left out, and that's the Finding Nemo section. While we've never stayed in that section, we've taken advantage of the big blue pool quite a lot. So it's kind of crazy that I completely forgot that. Anyway, it's kind of too big of a deal for me not to have made an addendum, so addendum. And that's because the first two buildings that were built for the Pop Century Classic Years project was actually two of the Little Mermaid buildings. However, the project ended up being stopped not long into construction because 9/11 ended up happening. And along with, many other things that happened throughout, the course of the nation and the world from the effects of 9/11, one of them was there was a major drop in tourism. So with that and the drop of revenue that was going to be, a natural effect of that, Disney had to cancel some of its ongoing projects that it had coming on the books and actually in progress. And there's actually many projects that were canceled due to this. One of them, though, was this Pop Century Classic Years. Initially, it wasn't planned to be canceled. It was just going to be, it was temporarily paused. And as year went over year, ended up being 11 years until the new resort actually ended up opening. So during that time period, what was known as the Classic Years or Pop Century ended up being canceled completely. This actually led to a really weird situation where when you're staying at Pop Century, you can look across the lake. Like there's no walls or anything blocking this. You look right across the lake and you see this just abandoned construction site. Like I said, there were the two buildings for Little Mermaid that had already been built. They weren't themed, they weren't painted, they're just concrete buildings. And then also the lobby had been partially completed. So when you're taking your vacation, your Disney trip to Pop Century, and you're walking around, the 80s and the 90s, 70s, you're walking around these really highly themed areas, you just look right across the lake and there's this just abandoned building. And to take it a step further, actually, so the Generation Gaps Bridge that connects the two resorts where the Skyliner Hub is now, that bridge had been built and you were able to walk halfway across it to a wall that stopped you from being able to go across. It was really just a bizarre kind of scene. It stayed like that, like I said, for over a decade. So between the time that Pop Century Classic Years had been canceled and when they decided to move forward with the project, there were a lot of things had changed. A lot of direction had changed in the company, and moving forward with a resort themed around the early 1900s really wasn't something that Disney was interested in doing at the time. The company as a whole had made a big shift towards including intellectual property into pretty much everything that they did. They went back to the drawing board and they came up with a theme, and they decided that the new resort, instead of being an expansion to Pop Century, was going to be its own standalone resort called the Art of Animation. And it'd be themed around three of Disney's classic and very popular intellectual properties: the Cars franchise, the Lion King, and Little Mermaid. The second major change that they shifted from the original design was the inclusion of the family suites. So All Star Music opened up in 1999, and they actually played around with including some family suites in that resort back then. Not many, but a few. It was a test run, and the test proved valuable. People love being able to have a value tiered resort with the room of a suite. So when they decided to move forward with Art of Animation, they decided that They would keep the 2 buildings that were already built because it would be just too expensive to tear those down and rebuild them. Those buildings were essentially completed. They just needed theming and finishing out. So they kept those 2 buildings, and they completed that wing. I believe it was 3 or 4 other buildings they had to build in that style. And the other 2 sections, the Lion King and the car section, they built out as full family suites. Value Resort Family Suite. And that's really the story about how a resort that was planned to be built themed to the early 1900s ended up being partially completed, left abandoned for over a decade, fully in guest views, completely rethought, reimagined, and then came to life as one of Disney's best and most loved value resorts.